Okay, hi everyone. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Cafe Oleh. Apologies if you tried to join last week. I wasn't feeling well, but we're back. Um, for those of you who are brand new here at Cafe Oleh, we go over the everyday Hebrew we use here in Israel that we use every day, but specifically for you as current, future, even past Olim, the Hebrew that you need to succeed here, whether it's reading your bills, following the news, the latest slang, um, how to complain, whatever it may be, right? This is a much more frontal class, so it's a little bit more suited to intro level, but really trying to understand what you as Olim need. So we're always open to suggestions for topics to cover. And also understanding that you may or may not be learning in an ulpan, or you learned previously learned Hebrew in other institutions, but the point is really focusing on everyday Hebrew that you can use regardless of what level. As always, like I just said, we're always open to new suggestions and topics. We actually have quite a busy schedule through the end of this calendar year, but nonetheless, we're always excited to hear what you want to learn, because that informs us also a lot about where Olim are at. That also being said, please check our YouTube channel. Please check Nefesh B'Nefesh's YouTube channel. I'm just to volunteer with them, but very happy to be here nonetheless. For all our previous episodes of Cafe Oleh, you'll also see this one up in the next 1 to 2 days. But all our previous ones are up there as well. So you'll be able to follow along. This one will be up in the next 1 to 2 days. You can review at your leisure. You can go over what we're going to do today. You can go over previous weeks, stop, record, whatever is the easiest for you. Today, we're actually going to go over what we were going to go through last week, which is some media literacy. I always think this is a really important class because even though there's plenty of English language media that comes from Israel, as we've talked about numerous times, it is not meant for local consumption. If you see what they're covering as the top news versus what's being covered in Hebrew language news in Israel, it's often very different. And oftentimes what's breaking here in Israel takes several hours to get translated and reported in English, even if it's coming from here in Israel. So it's really important as Olim, those who are living here in Israel, to actually know what's going on in real time. There's a reason why Israelis are glued to the news or listen to the radio at the top of the hour, even if they don't listen to the radio at all, just to hear the news updates. Things happen fast here. And it's that wonderful word dynamic, right? But it's very dynamic here in terms of news. It's great to know what's happening, to be informed, and also to know when you can turn it off. And one of the ways to do that is to know how to read the news in Hebrew. Not every word, but how to go about the anatomy of a Hebrew media website or newspaper, as it were, and be able to navigate it accordingly, to use context clues just like you would in English or in other languages, to know what's the headline, what are the important words, do I need to keep reading, can I move on, is something breaking, does it affect me, and so forth. We've done this in the past. We've gone through all the major news sources. I like to circle back and do them again. Today, we're actually going to do we're going to go a little bit more in depth into one article, but it's really good. First off, because it's very relevant to Olim, and also it has really good vocabulary, very everyday vocabulary that will also improve your Hebrew quite dramatically. So we're going to get started in just a second. Apologies to those who are going according to the schedule that Nefesh B'Nefesh put out. Unfortunately, I had to cancel class very last minute last week. I wanted to be sure that we got this class together. Do not worry, those of you who are looking for a slang class, we have count them, 3 slang courses on the YouTube channel. So if you're looking for that, you can by all means go through it, and no worries. We're going to go over slang next week. I'm always in favor of going over slang and current expressions, but it's equally important to know what's going on in the news and how to read the news. So with that, I'm going to share my screen first. We're actually going to start. I can pull it up before I share it with you. The website we're going to read, and then we're going to go into the article that we're going to read. It's very short, just like we've done in the past, but very important that you're able to read it. Okay, So we are on Khan's website, right? khan.org.il. This is the equivalent in Israel to the BBC, to PBS. This is public broadcasting in Israel. This is the descendant of Channel 1, which used to be the only Israeli TV station. Remember, it's also part of a media conglomerate, so it's a lot of radio stations. It's website Khan, which is a news agency, and so forth. This is, by all accounts, the standard in Israel, not just because this was the first. This is considered to be one of the more impartial news sources in Israel. It's much more fact-driven. It's less entertainment when it comes to news. Just like many of you know from your respective countries of origin, the news, especially news channels, can be very much about entertainment as much as they are about giving facts. This is not just news, right? Khan also has original series. It has imported series. It's considered I don't want to say higher level, but it's certainly highly acclaimed, especially in the last few years, as it has rebranded as Khan. This is the website. We've gone over this website before, but it's always good to know the top story is the top right, just like in English, right? The top right, because most people being right-handed immediately go to the right. I myself am left-handed, but I still have to acquiesce to certain trends. And the top news stories are at the top. Those red bars indicate the mini tag to get you interested, and then the headline, of course, under it. If you were to scroll down, you would see, right, it's 8 o'clock here in Israel, just after 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock is when all the news channels have their nightly news show. In this case, you're seeing here is streaming live here. So if you're abroad, assuming there's no issues with VPN and so forth, you're able to watch Israeli news live. Highly recommended for those of you at a slightly higher level or just want to hear the pattern of Hebrew, the tempo of Hebrew. It's a really important thing to do and to get used to. Because again, there is no live English from Israel. There is usually recorded. There's usually maybe once every other day, including here on Khan. But you're living here in Israel, important to know Hebrew. All right, this is the website I'm going to share with you. Sorry, just want to pull up what I want to share, which is an article from today. It was not the top story, but it was an important story, and you'll see how I know it was important in just a second as I pull it up. Here we go. It's an important story because it gets this really big graphic at the top. And I know it's a feature story. It's an important story. It's a short story, but it's a big one. If you can tell from the picture pretty quickly, you know what it's about. It's about, as we say in Hebrew, hakotel hama'aravi. Kotel is one of the many words in Hebrew that we have for a wall. But when we use it in modern Hebrew, we're specifically talking about hakotel hama'aravi. Ma'aravi, western or west. So the Western Wall, that's what we're talking about today. So let me pull up today's vocab list. Sorry, just one second. Okay, so I took from that page that I just showed you on Khan's website, I took the top headline and the first two paragraphs, and that's what we're going to go to read today. It's very simple Hebrew relative to what is normally in the newspaper. And what's great about this article is not just that it's relevant, it's about the Kotel, which many people, especially Olim, Jews in general, can affiliate with, whether or not that's your cup of tea, but it certainly can understand its context. This particular article, a lot of the words repeat themselves. So it's really good for vocabulary. And like I said, at the beginning of this lesson, really good in general vocabulary to have under your belt. So on the left-hand side is the snapshot of the article. We're going to go through each piece together. We're going to read the headline together first. Elkin besichot sgurot. I'm already on the third word of the first line, right? Elkin besichot sgurot לא אאפשר להעניק לזרמים הדתיים ייצוג בניהול הכותל. Okay, so what is this saying? First off, Elkin. Elkin is referring to the minister Ze'ev Elkin, right? This is Israel. This is in Hebrew. It's understood when it says Elkin, you knew who that is. If you don't know who that is, he, like I just said, is a government minister. We're going to hear a little bit more about why he's being quoted here and why it's being relevant to the Kotel if you don't know already, but we'll get to that shortly. Okay, Elkin, just make this full screen. Elkin besichot skurot. Sichot are conversations. Skurot, closed, right? So Elkin besichot skurot. Elkin in closed conversations, meaning behind the scenes, so forth. Lo eafsher lehanik. Lo eafsher. Lo is no. Eafsher, as you see here already on the right-hand side, we have our vocab for today, right? So the vocab, as always, the Hebrew is going to be in the middle with the dots and bars that indicate vowels, English on the left, transliteration on the right, and gender, when appropriate, will be written on the right as well. So let's start with the first one. Lo eafsher. Eafsher is the future tense, first person. So I will do something, or in this case, I will not do something. Le'afsher means to make possible. Okay, it comes from the same root, the same shoresh, the same letter root as the word efshar. We've talked about this word many times. Efshar is possible, or is it possible, or if it's efshar, it's impossible. This is the verb, right? So efshar is possible. Le'afsher is to make something possible, or to make possible. Right, so what does he say? Elkin in closed conversation, lo eafsher, I will not make it possible. What won't he make possible? Leha'anik. Leha'anik is our second word here, right? Leha'anik is to grant. Those of you who know the verb latet, which means to give, it's very much a synonym, but just like in English, we have the verb to give, we have the verb to grant, we have the same difference in Hebrew. La'anik is to grant, right? So a ma'anak with the same root, the same shoresh of ein, nun, kuf, means a grant. La'anik is to grant. Okay, so lo eafsher la'anik, to go back to the headline, I will not make possible, or I will not grant, lizramim hadatim yitzug benihul hakotel. Okay, what are zramim datim? Zerem is a stream, right? It's a stream of water, it's a stream of liquid, but it's also in Hebrew an ideological stream of movement, a denomination, right? So zerem is one stream, zramim is the plural. So streams. Hadatim, dati is religious. It comes from the word dat, which means religion in modern Hebrew. So zramim datim are religious streams, right? We can translate this into English as religious movements, religious denominations. In this case, we're talking about denominations, right? I will not grant the religious streams, i.e. denominations. I will not grant the religious denominations yitzug benihul hakotel. Yitzug is our next word. Really everyday word. I wasn't kidding when I said these words you can use them all the time. Yitzug is representation. It comes from the verb leyatzeg, which is to represent. It's from the same root that gives us the word hatzaga, a performance. Lehatzig is to perform or to present. And leyatzeg is to represent, right? And natzig is a representative. Really, really efficient how Hebrew works with regards to the shoresh, to the root, gives us all these words that are related to it based on its core meaning. Okay, so Elkin in closed conversations, I will not grant the religious movements, the religious streams, the religious denominations, yitzug, representation, benihul hakotel. Okay, nihul is our next word, managing. Comes from the verb lenahel, which means to manage. A menahel is a male manager. Menahelet is a female manager. Hanhala is management, right? So he will not give yitzug benihul hakotel. He will not give representation to the zramim datim, to the religious movements, in managing hakotel. Okay, the kotel. Really very basic words, understanding something big here, right? We saw the picture of the kotel, now we understand what he's saying. I will not give the religious movements, and we'll understand a little bit what that means if you can't figure it out already, representation in managing the kotel. So let's get into what he means. And here we're going to get into some, again, you're going to see the same words repeated again and again. The subheadline here, starting with the word lefi. Lefi hasar mitikva chadasha hamedina והסוכנות היהודית אמורים לנהל את המקום. Okay, so let's do this again. לפי השר מתקווה חדשה. לפי is our next word. We've done this word many times, but it means according to. Okay, hasar, sar or sar, depending on how you say the letter resh, the second word here, means minister in modern Hebrew, right? So according to the minister, Mitikva Chadasha. Tikva Chadasha is the name of his political party. It means New Hope, but that's the name of Ze'ev Elkin's political party in the Knesset and in the government. Lefi Hasar Mitikva Chadasha. According to the minister from Tikva Chadasha, Hamedina והסוכנות היהודית אמורים לנהל את המקום. Hamedina. Hamedina simply means the state. But when we use it in modern Hebrew, especially in the news, we understand this refers to Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, right? Just like we would say the state when we're talking about anything governmental in other countries, right? So according to this minister, the state, והסוכנות היהודית, word you all know, and the Jewish agency, Amurim. Amurim is our next word. Very important everyday word. Really important word. If I can't emphasize that enough, it's important. Amul is supposed to. It means supposed to. Okay, really good word to have under your proverbial belt. Okay, so according to the minister, the state and the Jewish agency, Amurim are supposed to linahel. We just had that word before, right? Nihul was managing. Linahel is to manage, right? It all comes back together. The state and the Jewish agency are supposed to manage et hamakom, the place. What place? The kotel. Okay, we're at the end of that sentence with that end of that line with that comma. Benigud lema shekava mitve hakotel hamekori. Benigud is our next word. Unlike or as opposed to. Okay, as opposed to or unlike lema shekava mitve hakotel hamekori. Lema, according, as opposed to what? Ma means what? Shekava mitve hakotel hamekori. So first off, what's mitve? Mitve is outline. We talked about this word a lot when we've recovered news regarding the pandemic here, that a mitve is an outline. It's the basis of a plan, of a directive. Oftentimes when new directives came out in the last year and a half with regards to the pandemic, it would start with a mitve, an outline, a sketch of what was going to happen, right? And would be released to the news. So mitve hakotel hamekori refers to the original mekori, Mitveh HaKotel, the outline plan for the Kotel. Okay, if those of you who remember a little bit of recent history, several years ago, the government was tasked with coming up with a new plan for access to the Kotel that would allow both Orthodox and egalitarian services to take place there. There was a mitveh was proposed, it was agreed to, and then it was voted down by the government. It was never put into action. It was actually agreed upon by the government, and then it was never put into action. It was frozen, right? And he's talking about here in this news article that Elkin, as opposed to that original plan, hamitveh hamekori, right? We just had those two words, mitveh mekori. He's saying that hamedina והסוכנות היהודית אמורים לנהל את המקום. That instead of the original plan, that the state and the Jewish agency would now manage the Kotel Plaza, access to the Kotel. Okay, right? You're going to see these words happen again and again. Let's keep going. This is Ze'ev Kam, as you see the byline, just like you would see in a byline of any other news source, right? And this is from this morning, 15th of November, 2021, 8:49 in the morning. Okay, so let's keep reading. Hasar Ze'ev Elkin, right under his biopic, right? Hasar Ze'ev Elkin mitikva chadasha, right? So we already know these four words, right? Hasar, minister. Elkin is his last name. So Ze'ev Elkin, that's his first name, Ze'ev, Elkin last name. Mitikva chadasha, the name of his political party, right? So Minister Ze'ev Elkin from Tikva Chadasha, מבהיר בשיחות סגורות כי לא יאפשר להעניק לזרמים הדתיים מעמד רשמי בניהול הכותל במסגרת המתווה. You already know what this is, right? We read the headline together, we read the sub-headline together. But now let's further enrich your vocabulary. But we already know the gist of what's going to happen here, right? So Minister Ze'ev Elkin of the Tikva Chadasha party, Mavhir, clarifies, or illuminates, either way you would like to translate it. Besichot skurot, we already talked about that, right? In closed conversations. Ki, now ki is an important word. Ki we normally translate as because, right? Because is the normal way to do it. In formal Hebrew, in higher level Hebrew, ki also means that, okay, T-H-A-T. So here it's meaning that. Ze'ev Elkin Mavhir clarifies or illuminates, but clarify is a better word here. In these closed conversations, ki, that, lo ya'afsher la'anik lizramim datim mamad rishmi benihul hakotel b'mizgeret hamitveh. We know most of these words already, right? Lo ya'afsher, instead of the quote from the headline of Lo eafsher, I will not allow. Here it is, who, he, lo yafshel, he will not permit. Right now it's conjugated for the same tense, future, but third person, because we're talking about him. It's no longer quoting him. Right? He will not allow, he will not permit. Leha'anik, that same word again, to grant, up here. Remember, to grant. He will not grant. Lizramim datim, again, exact same vocabulary. The religious movements, the religious denominations. Ma'amad rishmi benihul hakotel b'mizgeret hamitveh. Even if you didn't know what ma'amad rishmi meant, you could still figure it out, right? He doesn't want to give, he will not allow, or he will not grant the religious movements. Ma'amad rishmi, let's say blank, benihul hakotel. We already know what nihul is, management. So we know what he's saying, right? He's not allowing, he will not allow the religious movements. Ma'amad rishmi. Ma'amad is a standing. Rishmi is official, right? Even if you didn't know those two words from context alone, because we already went through the major words here, you already know what this sentence is saying. He will not allow the religious movement's official standing in the b'mizgeret hamitveh. Mizgeret is framework, mitveh again, outline. Same words repeat over and over. We can figure this out pretty easily what the other words mean, right? He will not allow the religious movement's official standing in managing the space according to the outline. כך פורסם היום בתוכנית הבוקר הזה בכאן רשת ב'. Okay, this part is just clarifying where this quote came from, right? כך means as, or such. פורסם was published. Hayom, today. בתוכנית הבוקר, on the morning show. Tochnit is a plan or a program, but also a show in this case. Boker, morning. Bekan Reshet Bet. Reshet Bet, I talked about before, is one of Kan's many radio stations. Reshet Bet, which Reshet means network. Bet is simply the second letter of the alphabet, right? Reshet Bet is the all news radio station, right? So if you just want to hear the news and talk shows, you would listen into Reshet Bet. And there's a whole bunch of others. Reshet Gimel is just Hebrew music. Reshet Daled is the Arabic station, and so forth. Okay, so we have a little context of where this quote came from. It was relayed on the radio show this morning on Reshet Bet. And then the end of this first paragraph, zot, this, meaning this declaration, binigud, we just had that word before, right? Binigud, unlike or as opposed to, lema shekava mitveh hakotel hamekori. Literally the same words we had before. This in as opposed to the original outline, mitveh, right? Mitveh hakotel hamekori, the original plan for the kotel. Okay, now we're going to read a little bit more to understand a little bit of what the original plan was, or at least who's not going to be involved. Okay, the beginning of this second paragraph here. L'divrei Elkin, davar is a thing, but also a word. So according to the words of Elkin, according to him, to Elkin, she yitzag et miflagto benose ze b'masa umatan hakoalitioni. Okay, some of these words we already had, right? She yitzeg, we had that word, right? Yitzeg was up here. Yitzug, we had the verbal noun representation. Yitzeg or yitzag is he represented, right? I told you liyatzeg is to represent. This is the past tense third person masculine. So according to Elkin, lidivrei Elkin, sheyitzeg et miflagto, who represented what? Et miflagto, et hamiflaga shelo. Miflaga, political party. We've already heard multiple times he belongs to which party? Hatikva Chadasha. Okay, so according to Elkin, who represented his party, miflagto, benose ze, nose is a subject or topic. Okay, who represented his party in this topic, in what context? Masa umatan koalitioni. So let's take the last word here, koalitioni here. Okay, coalizioni, it may sound Italian to some people, it may sound Greek. Coalizioni is a cognate, right? It comes from coalition. Coalitia is a coalition in Hebrew, or at least in cognate Hebrew. Coalizioni is the adjective, right? So in what with regards to the coalition? Masa umatan, right? Right in the middle of this first line in the second paragraph. Masa umatan is negotiations. We actually had this word 2 weeks ago, abbreviated in a article we were reading. Here it is fully written out, right? Masa umatan means negotiations in Hebrew. So according to Elkin, Sheyitzeget Miflagto, who represented his party on this topic in the coalition negotiations. Remember, excuse me, the current Israeli government is comprised of 8 parties. And there were a lot of negotiations that need to be done in this. So in discussing this, as they were forming a coalition to have a government, he represented this specific topic about the Kotel. Okay, and now we're at the end of the second, end of the first line in the second paragraph. Zramim datim, we know this multiple times, right? The religious movements, the religious denominations, lo amurim lekabel yitzug o ma'amad benihul hakotel. Okay, so according to Elkin, Zramim datim, religious movements, religious denominations, lo amurim. Again, that same word, supposed to. In this case, not supposed to. The religious movements, lo amurim, are not supposed to. Lekabel, receive, to receive. Yitzug, once again, that same word, representation. O mamad, or standing. We talked about that word before. Benihul hakotel, managing the kotel. Right? Again, same words repeat over and over. According to Elkin, Zramim Datim, the religious movements, are not supposed to receive yitzug, are not supposed to receive representation or a mamad, or a standing, benihul hakotel, in nihul, managing the kotel. And then it goes on. Misha amura lenahel et hakotel, Misha, me is who, Amul, we said, is supposed to, right? Who is supposed to lenahel et hakotel? Who is supposed to receive? Who is supposed to, excuse me, manage the kotel? Lefi gishato. Okay, so we know most of these words already. Who is supposed to Amul לנהל את הכותל? מי שאמורה לנהל את הכותל, who is supposed to represent, or excuse me, manage the kotel, לפי, according to, gishato. Gishato is our last word here, our last new vocab word. Gisha is an approach or stance, right? Gishato, hagisha shelo, his approach, his stance. Okay, who is supposed to manage the kotel according to his perspective, according to his approach? He is, excuse me, Medinat Israel והסוכנות היהודית. Okay, who is supposed to represent, who is supposed to manage the kotel? Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, והסוכנות היהודית, and the Jewish agency. Okay, we're in the almost the last line here. ולא, and not, הרפורמים, הקונסרבטיביים, or האורתודוקסים. Okay, so according to Elkin, who represented this topic from his party in the coalition negotiations, the religious movements are not supposed to receive any representation or standing in the Kotel plan, but who is supposed to linahel et Kotel, who is supposed to manage the Kotel, lefi gishato, according to his approach, is Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, והסוכנות היהודית, and the Jewish agency, and not Reformim, Conservativim, or Orthodoxim, and not the Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox movements, right? Orthodox, it's understood to mean movements, right? So if you didn't understand what I was trying to hint at with Zlamim Datim, now we know what that means, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox movements. What is this all talking about? If to, again, zoom back a little, the original plan of the Kotel Compromise Plan was given to then chairman of the Jewish Agency, Natan Sharansky, to come up with a plan that would allow access to the Kotel from all the different movements. The current status quo is the main plaza is controlled by the Western Wall Heritage Foundation. It's Orthodox, so it's segregated. It has a mechitza, it has a gender segregation with it. And on the far south side under Robinson's Arch, it was meant to be a space for egalitarian services shared by the Reform and Conservative movements. It was never enforced. This split was never enforced. There were other plans that were put together. The government agreed to one and never implemented. It was frozen. Now Ze'ev Elkin, who we hear was representing this topic in negotiations, is now saying, we're going to scrap that, or it's my intention to scrap that. And instead, we're going to do this. Why is this important? Why is this an article to begin with? Well, first off, a little bit more context here. Ze'ev Elkin originally was in the Likud party. He's also a religious man, wears a kippah. So that's already a big deal. This government has shown a lot with regards to being inclusive, but also making sure that the chief rabbinate, which up till now has done a lot of controlled what we call the status quo, or in Hebrew, the status quo, which is everything that has to do with religious life. So conversion, marriage, divorce, kashrut, all these different things are run by the status quo, which existed before the state of Israel existed, right? The status quo has basically been applied to the Western Wall since 1967, giving it only access to Orthodox services in the main plaza. The South Plaza has been given unofficially to Reform and Conservative movements, and so forth. This is a big deal primarily for Jews in diaspora. It doesn't make splash news in Israel. It did happen this year. It happens actually at the beginning of every Jewish month on Rosh Chodesh, because typically there is a group called Nashot HaKotel, Women of the Wall, who come to pray on Rosh Chodesh, including with reading from the Torah. They're usually stopped by rabbis and even in the past, members of Knesset from ultra-Orthodox parties. They used to be stopped by the police. That has since become a court order not to do so. But there's usually some sort of scuffle. Since this new government, there's also been members of Knesset who come in favor of the egalitarian prayers. They're trying to figure this out, all in the context of this new government, which is, for the first time in many years, does not include ultra-Orthodox parties who are against any compromise, any mitveh hakotel that is straying from the current plan. Right? So this is important because it's in the context of a larger reform that this new government, or no longer new, but 5-6 months in, is trying to do. And so this makes coverage in Israel, even when it's not Rosh Chodesh, when it's not the beginning of the Jewish month, because it also has to do with diaspora Jewry, as we saw at the very end here, right? Reformim, conservativim, ve'orthodoxim. In Israel, though, the reform and conservative movements are very small, as opposed to in North America and elsewhere in the Jewish world, which are very large. And that dichotomy plays out the most at the Kotel. We don't usually hear about it in major news stories in Israel, other than every month at the Kotel, because trying to connect diaspora Jews to Israel and vice versa includes this conversation of who has access, which form of Judaism does the state allow. All forms are allowed. The issue is who is granted this sense of autonomy that at the Kotel they're allowed. And so this is an ongoing conversation that already the prime minister, the foreign minister, other ministers of this current government have said we absolutely need to make this equal access to everyone, or at least access to everyone. Ze'ev Elkin, religious minister, he's also in charge of Jerusalem affairs, and he was in part of the negotiations in the government for this, has said, I want to scrap all of this, right? I want, instead of the movements running it with their own politics and their own rabbis, I want this to be a state-run place, split between Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, HaSochnut HaYehudit, the Jewish agency, understanding its larger importance to all Jews here. It's a very interesting topic to come up. I thought that was important for all of us to go over, also because the vocab is great. It's really, as you see these words, right? Just look at the words on the right-hand side of your screen. Representation, managing or management, according to, supposed to, as opposed to, outline, to push. These are all words, excuse me, that we use on a regular basis in Hebrew, whether we're talking about the Kotel or any news article. So really good words to have. I thought we would take a short break from that. I see we have some questions here in the Q&A and in the chat. If you have any questions, please take some time now to write them in. I see two questions of the same things. Two people are asking, doesn't leha anik mean to nurse? Great question, it does not. Look at this verb again, leha anik. Okay, this root is ayin nun kuf. Hebrew is very all about spelling. You can't misspell in Hebrew and be understood. It's very important that you spell correctly. The shoresh, the root of to grant, is ein nun kuf. Two different people asked me in the Q&A here, doesn't that mean to nurse? No. The verb to nurse is, let me actually make this a little bit bigger so you can see. I'll write it right here. To grant. Le hanik le ha'anik. Right, just make sure that's correct. It is, it was originally up there. Let's just make sure everyone sees this well, okay? We had the verb lehanik, leha'anik. Leha'anik means to grant. Two people asked, doesn't that mean to nurse? It does not. The verb for to nurse is lehanik. Very important in Hebrew to enunciate. I know many people, whether it's their own native language or the way they learned Hebrew, that certain letters do not get sounded thoroughly. In Hebrew, it's very important to enunciate. Now, the letter ayin, right? Some people pronounce it, especially coming from countries that spoke Arabic would say ayn, right? So you'll hear people say leha anik to really emphasize there's an ayn in there. You don't need to do that in modern Hebrew, but you do need to pause. You need to have that glottal stop, right? Ayn, like the letter aleph, is a glottal letter. It means that it's spoken from your glottis, from your throat. So lehanik is to nurse, but leha anik, right? You need to pause there to make sure that you're in showing that it's not to nurse, it's to grant. Leha anik is to grant. Lehanik is to nurse. And even if I didn't know that, I can almost 99% figure out from context here that I'm not talking about to nurse, as in a wet nurse, as in to breastfeed a child, right? So I understand that Hasar Ze'ev Elkin, that the minister is saying that he will not allow to nurse for the religious movements to nurse at the Kotel. That is not at all what's being spoken about here, right? He's not allowing, he's not granting the religious movements management access at the Kotel. Okay, very good question, but very important. Spelling is destiny in Hebrew. We've talked about this many times. It's very important to remind you all. Spelling is destiny. You cannot get away with misspelling in Hebrew. I know that's a challenge for many people, especially those who have cognitive issues and challenges, people who have dyslexia, but spelling is really key in Hebrew. It's very concise like that, but it does demand that certain letters have to be sounded or at least spelled out so you don't confuse them, just like lehanik and leha'anik. Great questions. Thank you for those. Philip asks, is amul related to omer, to say? Yes, absolutely. This verb here, sorry, this word amul, supposed to, right? It is related to the verb lomar, to say. Omer is he says, or I say in present tense. So amul can be thought of as it is said, right? It is supposed to. It has been said that, right? It's a fancy way of saying supposed to. Or it has been said that. But instead in everyday Hebrew, in everyday English rather, we say just it's supposed to. Okay, very good question there, Philip. Okay. Mordechai asks, Anak is a giant. Correct, Anak is a giant. Happens to be related. Miri asks, does dati mean just ultra-Orthodox? Does it mean religious in a more general sense? Miri, as I said before, zramim datim, religious movements, right? Dati, like I said, just means religious. We're not talking about anything else here. We keep hearing this term, right? Zramim datim, religious movements. Dati simply means religious. It can be both someone who is religious or can be a zerem dati, a religious movement. Okay, meaning it's a movement that is affiliated with a religion. It doesn't mean that movement itself is quote unquote religious, but it just means that movement is affiliated with religious, right? We often equate religious with observant, and when we talk in Jewish terms. That's not what this means here. It simply means a religious movement, a movement affiliated with a religious ideology. Okay, great questions. Vivian asks, Roshem is impression. Same root, correct? Roshem is impression, correct. Roshem, Resh Vav Shin Mem in the chat. Yes, means impression. Okay. Any last questions? Okay, Kathy asks a great question here in the chat. How would you say the following? It is supposed to be sunny today. So in Hebrew, again, amul is supposed to, and in the default, it's going to be in the masculine. So amur liot, how would I say sunny? We don't usually use the word sunny. What we say is clear in Hebrew. So amur liot bahir. Okay, so we had that word mavhir before, right? Where was that? at this first line, right? Sar Ze'ev Elkin mitikva chadasha mavhir, clarifies, illuminates, however you want to say that. Bahir, and let me write that here. Bahir, clear, i.e. sunny, is bahir. Bahir. Okay. So if I wanted to say, right, as according to Kathy wrote, it is supposed to be sunny today. If you look at the tachazit, the forecast, on a sunny, clear day, it's going to use the word clear, not sunny, right? Sun in Hebrew is shemesh, but we don't turn shemesh into an adjective, right? Sunny, that E at the end, just like in English that makes it an adjective. It's no longer a sun or the sun, it's sunny, right? Is of sun-like or sun included. It's an adjective. Hebrew, when we want to say a sunny day, we simply say it's a clear day, right? So we'll use this word bahir, right? So if you go to a tachazit mezeg avir, if you go to the forecast of the weather forecast, and it's a sunny day, right? And even in the picture, you won't see any clouds. You won't see ananim, clouds, and it won't say me'unan, which means cloudy. It'll simply write bahir, bahir, clear, right? In English, we would normally say sunny, but in Hebrew, we don't. We simply say clear, meaning lack of clouds. Okay, great question. But yes, you would say Amul liot bahir. It's supposed to be clear, i.e. it's supposed to be sunny. Anonymous asks, can we have a class that's related to spelling letters that sound the same but are different? Absolutely. Lehanik and lehanik is already a great example of why spelling is so important in Hebrew. And pronunciation is, right? No one is expecting you to sound like a formal announcer or a formal newsreader or a radio broadcaster and to pronounce it like they do in very florid Hebrew. But nonetheless, it's lehanik and lehanik. And even if you were saying it fast, like lehanik, I'll still know through context we're talking about to grant and not to nurse. Okay, any last questions? Okay, so with that, toda rabah, thank you all very much. Next week, we will be back and with slang and with contemporary phrases that are really good to know. Again, if you have any questions, if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover in future classes, please write to Nefesh B'Nefesh directly. This session will be up on YouTube on Nefesh B'Nefesh's YouTube channel in the next 1 to 2 days. You can simply look and type in Cafe Oleh. You'll see this one and all our previous ones as well. And until then, toda rabah, thank you all so much, and lehitraot. See you all very soon. Take care.